Welcome to Looking Fabulous with Adobe Illustrator. My name is Marla A.U. In this video, I'm going to teach you a fading technique using Adobe Illustrator that will make your artwork look fabulous. You can follow along as we create a simple vector arrow. Then we're going to use an opacity mask to fade the arrow from the flat side on the left to a solid color where the arrow comes to a point on the right. Let's launch Adobe Illustrator and get started. I'm using Adobe Illustrator 2019. We're going to create a new file, and I'm going to use the postcard size. For this tutorial, we're going to need 4 palettes. We're going to need the Layers palette, the Transparency palette, the Gradient palette, and the Stroke palette. If these palettes are not on your desktop, you can go to Window and you can pull down. There's Gradient, Layers, Stroke, and Transparency. Let's open the Layers palette. We're going to select Layer 1 and double click to rename it, and I'm going to name it Background. Hit the Return key. I want the background to have a solid fill. In order to make a solid fill, I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and I want the fill, so double click on the fill icon, and I'm going to make it a yellow. Then select the stroke and make it none. With the rectangle tool, we're going to draw a rectangle around your artboard. Then using the keyboard Command 0 to recenter it, and then I'm going to lock the background layer. Need to create a new layer. Layer tool, double click on it and name it Art. On the Art layer, we're going to create a line segment. We need to use the Line Segment tool. We want a fill of none. Double click on the stroke icon, and we're going to make it a blue. Okay? Now with the Line Segment tool selected, we're going to click on the background, hold the Shift key to constrain it. Line segment. We want to go to the Stroke palette. We're going to change the weight to 80 points. If you don't see this section of the Stroke palette, if your palette simply looks like this, go to the upper right hand corner, click on it, and show options. On the arrowheads, on the right hand side, we want to select an arrowhead, and I'm going to choose arrowhead 7. Well, that doesn't look much like an arrow, it looks like a big wedge, so what's the problem here? If you go to the scale where it says 100%, double click on that and type in 25%. That looks better. In the profile, you have these different shapes, and these shapes affect only the line segment, not the arrowhead. And there's some interesting effects here, and you can look through them and play with them, but I'm going to use the uniform. You click off of that, and you can see we now have an arrow that points to the right. Now I need to fade this arrow. Let's go back to the layer palette, open the art layer where it says line. I'm going to double click on line and name it arrow. And we need to create mask. We're going to need the rectangle tool with a stroke of none, and we need to create a gradient fill. We need to go to the gradient palette. We're going to use the default gradient, which goes from white to black. With the rectangle tool, we're going to draw a rectangle around your arrow. Make sure the rectangle completely covers your arrow. And this is going to be our mask. The mask is going to cover the item below it. Everywhere that is white is going to allow 100% of the image below it to come through, and where it is black is going to completely hide whatever's below it. On your layers palette, you want to make sure that your rectangle mask, and let's rename that, double click on that, and we're going to name it mask. You want to make sure that the rectangle mask is above the item that you're going to mask out, which is the arrow. If it looks like this with the arrow above the mask, your fading technique is not going to work. So make sure your mask is above your arrow. Now we need to select both of them. Click on the mask, hold your shift key down, select on the arrow to select them both. You can also use your selection tool, draw a rectangle around both of them to select them. To create your mask, we need to go to the transparency panel, and with the gradient, make mask. Let me click off this so you can see it. We've got your arrow, and it's going from solid on the flat side, fading to the point. But I want just the opposite. I want it to be fading here and solid at the point. So let's select our arrow, go back to your transparency, make sure you're on the gradient. You have the box to see that you're selecting the gradient. If you have the line, you're selecting only the arrow. So we want to select the gradient, and we want to invert the mask. So we now have it fading to solid at the tip. But I want the entire arrowhead to be solid. To do this, we're going to have the opacity mask. And if you don't see the opacity mask, if you click on the arrow and then go to the layers, you're going to see that you have the art, the arrow, in the background, but you don't have the mask, because the mask is now a sub-layer of the arrow. To get to the mask, click on transparency. You're now on the arrow. You want to click on the gradient, and you know you're on the gradient because of the box. Then if you use the gradient tool, you're going to see your gradient slider. If you don't see your gradient slider, you may be on the stroke. So be sure you're on the fill. We're going to take the black swatch, I'm going to pull it down so that is solid arrowhead, and I'm going to adjust my midtone because I want it to fade a little differently. Maybe creep up the white. And there you have it, a nice arrow that fades to solid. Now your arrow is still completely editable. So click on the arrow so that you can get back to your main layer, and you can resize your line segment. I'll do that. You can rotate it. Now when you rotate it, if you go to your transparency palette, notice that you've also rotated your mask. Click back on the arrow. You can also apply effects to this. So if we go to Effect, Stylize, Scribble. And there you have it. You can now add a fabulous fade to any of your objects using the Opacity Mask feature in Adobe Illustrator. If you found this tutorial helpful, give it a like. And in my next video tutorial, I'll show you how to fade a placed image on all 4 sides.